Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Jeff Waldorf here, around the nation, on the TYT Nation YouTube channel. Got a great show for you guys today. We're also streaming on Facebook, by the way. So we're streaming on the TYT Nation Facebook page. We're streaming on the TYT Community Facebook page. We're also streaming on Jeff Waldorf, my personal page. Hey, if you haven't liked those, you probably should. Just saying. You know, if you want more of me, if you want less of me, that's fine too. Sometimes even I want less of me. No, that's not true at all. Let's be fair about that. I just lied to you. There, yeah. Anyway, so that weird way to start a show, but why not, right? Please like and share the stream if you haven't already. I appreciate it when you do that. That helps the show, helps things get out, etc. So altogether, it's good for everybody. Even people who despise me, well then, if you share, if you hate the show and you hate me, but you share it with your right-wing friends, then you can have a hate party, and you can hate watch together. It's win-win for everybody. So there's that. Anyway, hope you guys had a great weekend. I believe I am over the last of whatever the crap I had last week was. So that's good. So we're ready for the news. Back to the normal schedule, starting off 2019. Doing some, normal shows again, getting kind of back into the groove. I know we've had a lot of time off. But hey, sometimes you need it. Earlier today, they were talking about, burnout. Burnout culture, right? And look, David Schroeder had a great tweet on that. It's too bad I don't have that pulled up right now. But I was reading that earlier. And he was saying something about everybody having to be basically on all the time. Here we go. Sorota's tweet. It's a good story. I only had one problem with it. It's not just a phenomenon affecting millennials. It affects everyone in an increasingly unstable and freelance-based economy. No job security, no safety net, no affordability equals working oneself into exhaustion slash burnout. Now, I can tell you from my perspective, I love what I do. So I love this job. I love doing this. I love talking about the news and about policy and things like that. But at the same time, YouTube itself is burnout culture. Continuously putting more and more content out, really trying to hit the algorithm, to play the algorithm and the grind. So I can see why, look, Kyle Kalinske hosts a Secular Talk. I believe I was talking to him maybe a year or 2 years ago, I think. Just having like a one-on-one chat and, off camera. And he's like, let me tell you, I've been burnt out for the last 2 years. He's like, so that's just a part of the job. It's sort of the nature of the whole thing. So if you're burnt out, and that's just in this, and even when you really love what you're doing, sometimes you need a break. So, we had a break. But there are people out there that don't get breaks, that are still living in this burnout period. So, and Sirota in that tweet he kind of nails it on the head. I'm not quite sure where I was going with that. But nonetheless, it is good to be back, personally, because I am looking forward to doing a bunch of stories for you guys today. In fact, what we have here is we're going to talk about the generals, Donald Trump and the generals. We also have price hikes for prescription drugs. We have corporate lobbyists serving in the Trump administration. We also have poll on Green New Deal. You're going to love that poll. And then we'll talk about raising taxes to 70% on the rich. Oh my God, there has been a freak out. So that's fun. We've got some video to go along with that. I love that story. Okay, so that's what we've got here today. So I guess we should get started here, but before we do, of course, please like and share the stream. Also, we have a fundraiser going on still. We're into our 10th day And we have raised about $295 for new equipment for the camera for TYT Nation. So the plan is I get that camera, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to do a lot of events, film a lot of events, post that up on the channel, and maybe use some of that stuff for commentary purposes as well. So primary season is coming up. After primary season is 2020. I'm in Michigan, so I'm in a swing state. So there's going to be a lot of activity here in this state once it gets to that point, especially in the Democratic primary. So I want to film that stuff for you guys. I want to get that content, and I want to be able to show it, and I want to be able to talk about it for you guys. That's why I'm doing this fundraiser. We're trying to raise $1,500 in order to get a new camera and equipment related to that. So help me do that. Go to GoFundMe.com/TYT Nation Camera. And if you don't want to do that, or if you just want to support the show without going to the fundraiser, that's fine too. Support the show, Patreon.com/TYT Nation. All right, guys. Enough of that. Let's get to the news. I think enough of you are here by now for me to get into the stories. Okay. All right, and here we go. So recently, President Trump held a wild cabinet meeting to start the year off 2019, right? Now, in it, he said quite a few nonsensical things. That's not a shock, including the idea that Afghanistan was responsible for turning the Soviet Union into Russia. Now, isn't that a good argument to leave Afghanistan? Well, again, look, President Trump said he was in favor of ending these wars, getting out of these countries. He talked about Syria. Now he's kind of backpedaled on that, which sucks because I actually give him a lot of credit for ending the conflict in Syria, at least our part in that conflict in Syria. So again, I want to give him credit, but he's got to actually do the right things to get credit. But anyway, he says, as I said, nonsensical things because he doesn't understand history, right? Now, he also added in this that he said he would have been a good general. He would have been a great general. Well, look, to be fair, he had a chance to be a good general, but unfortunately, he avoided military service his father actually got him had actually gotten a doctor. That was a New York Times story on that, to sign off on him having fake bone spurs. Okay. All right. Now, amid all the other fun highlights in that crazy interview is the fact that Donald Trump really loves his generals. In fact, following that Oval Office meeting, the Toronto Star's Washington correspondent, Daniel Dale, tweeted this, quote, "Trump's hingedness level was not high today." Is it ever really? I mean, let's be fair. Is it ever really high? Just saying. Then he added, Trump said he had a meeting about Iran in the Middle East with lots of good-looking generals. Quote, "like from a movie, better looking than Tom Cruise and stronger. And I had more generals than I've ever seen. And we were at the bottom of this incredible room. I said, this is the greatest room I've ever seen." Wow. Yeah, it's the greatest room he'd ever seen compared to any other room. It has to be the best. He also added, it's got big water, ocean. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. And maybe he threw some towels. I don't know. It wouldn't shock me. So look, the relevant part of that is Trump's got a hard-on for generals. Well, no shit. Of course. Look, and it's because deep down he knows that he could have never been a general. Why? Because he's too cowardly and too stupid. And he knows it. Look, Donald Trump's a stupid person, but he definitely knows what he can and cannot do. Right? It is pretty sad and pretty pathetic. And by the way, Tom Cruise? Really? Okay, What general do we have now that looks better than Tom Cruise? I'm not actually knocking our generals. I'm just curious. Like, I'm curious about this now because apparently America's got some pretty goddamn good looking generals. Generally speaking, of course. No, what's funny about that statement is that, again, Trump only cares about appearances, not effectiveness. I mean, recently I covered this, and this was a fantastic article, right, about an NBC, a veteran NBC reporter who quit the network. Why did he quit NBC? Well, it's because they were blatantly pro-war. So they would always talk about how, oh no, war is great, and they would avoid the mistakes of the generals, right? They would avoid the fact that the generals did not have good exit strategies, and that in the Middle East, their entire policy was not about winning conflict, it's about prolonging conflict as much as possible. So it's not surprising that they have no idea how to win the wars because the whole point is to not win the war. The whole point is to prolong these wars and to prolong occupation so that people and generals and not only that but defense contractors continue to get money. And of course, why he quit is that he said, look, NBC and CNN and other mainstream media outlets, they are afraid to call out the generals and the military. And look, apparently so is Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't care if they're winning. No, he only cares if they look good. It's all about appearances. And so him saying, oh, we got the greatest generals because they look good. It's not surprising at all. So very, very sad, very pathetic. We have a man-child as president who doesn't care about military effectiveness, who doesn't care about ending these actual conflicts. It's all a soundbite. It's all vanity. And what can I say? Look, the thing about that is I actually did have a hope that of the one thing that he would actually follow through on is that he would actually end some of these conflicts. But he's shown again and again, surrounded by these apparently hot generals that he just can't say no to. He continues to, allow ourselves to be involved in these conflicts in the Middle East that are benefiting no one except for wealthy defense contractors and, of course, weapons manufacturers. And that's the sad truth of it. Okay. All right. Let's move on here. Here's some coffee. It's one of those days. All right. Okay, that is not working. All right. Now to kind of show you an example of why we want any of those conflicts, let's go to the next story into corporate lobbying. Now, recently, President Trump has begun to waffle on the idea of leaving Syria. Now, you could point to, well, look, we need to help our allies, we need to help the Kurds, and that's an interesting, perspective and one that I'm sympathetic to because, again, our Kurdish allies have actually been fighting ISIS, and they do deserve some sort of support to make sure that Turkey does not annihilate them because Turkey is against the Kurds. Everybody seems to be against the Kurds. So if you want to make an argument that, well, we should at least support the Kurds or protect the Kurds, that's an interesting one. I don't necessarily agree that we should be involving ourselves. But then again, you could also argue from the other side that we have made promises to the Kurds and that we should at least back up our promises and not just leave the Kurds to the wolves, right? Or our other allies in that area. So again, if you want to have a conversation on that, that's fine. It'd be a very interesting policy conversation. But as far as my perspective is, I am anti-interventionist, and so I'm very anti-war. So I'm not exactly interested in staying in Syria. Now, Trump and the rest of the administration are interested, and there's actually a pretty good reason why. Turns out that of his cabinet, defense industry lobbyists now take up 4 positions as Trump cabinet secretaries. Now, if you're wondering why we are staying in these areas, why we are continuing endless war, this might be one of the reasons why. Now, according to the New York Times' Eric Lipton, secretaries for several of the most important agencies, the executive branch of the federal government, like the Department of Defense, Interior, and Health and Human Services, are now lobbyists for the industries those agencies are supposed to be regulating. So, again, we've got defense industry lobbyists in defense. We've got industry lobbyists in pretty much every major cabinet position. Great. Now, Eric Lipton, I'm going to go to the tweet here. He says, as of Thursday, DOD will be run by a former senior Boeing executive. EPA run by a former coal lobbyist, HHS run by a former pharmaceutical lobbyist, and Interior will be run by a former oil lobbyist. Welcome to 2019. Great. Now, look, in case you don't understand why this might be a bad thing, well, it kind of leads to corruption. It actually leads to this kind of corruption. Apparently, since Trump has been president, Boeing has spent $28 million lobbying Congress. Now, what did they get in return? They ended up getting lucrative deals for the aerospace contractor, most recently winning a $400 million contract to build B-1 and B-52 bombers just before the end of 2018, according to Reuters. And it's not just awarding contracts, it's also affecting policy, which of course will affect these very industries, right? Now, for example, Andrew Wheeler is the acting administrator for the EPA. Now, he recently, and we covered this on the show, a new rule that would allow for more mercury pollution in the air from coal-fired power plants. So less regulation of coal-fired power plants. Well, now, who did Wheeler used to work for? Wheeler used to work as a lobbyist for Murray Energy. The rule change came at the request of CEO of Murray Energy. So this guy worked for Murray Energy. The CEO of Murray Energy asked the Trump administration to get rid of this rule, and the former lobbyist said, yes, sir, we'll do that. I'm going to get rid of this rule. We're going to propose changes to make it so that we will allow more mercury and we will have less regulation as a result of this. It will be more difficult to regulate mercury emissions. Wonderful. That's what you get. Now, former Interior Secretary Brian Zinke also left his post, paving the way for former oil industry lobbyist David Bernhardt to lead the agency tasked with protecting public lands. Now, what is he doing instead? Well, basically, Bernhardt is now leasing public lands to oil and gas companies. Shocker. Alex Azar, who has headed the Department of Health and Human Services since 2018, is also a former lobbyist for pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly, and since taking over, has done absolutely nothing to stop the wave of increases in drug prices that will be happening this year, and that have happened last year as well. So, wonderful. And guess what? There are more price increases coming this year for drug prices. I don't know about you guys, but it appears the swamp has gotten a bit swampier since Trump got in office. Now, isn't that weird? It's almost as if the administration itself, the whole purpose of the Trump administration, is to break off the pieces of the federal government and sell them to private industry. Mega guys. Do you guys understand yet what I'm trying to say? If you've made it this far and you're actually listening and you're trying to say, well, come on, well, maybe giving it to industry is good. No, how do you not see the corruption? How do you not understand the corruption? I'm seriously trying. I'm trying to understand. You voted for President Trump in the hopes that he would break up the Washington swamp. This is the swamp right here, putting people in charge of industries, of regulating industries that they had previously worked for. A revolving door is part of the corruption that Hillary Clinton herself, was involved in as well. The Democrats were involved with, and Republicans. It doesn't matter. The revolving door exists on both sides. How can you look at this and say, oh no, this is fine? This kind of corruption is fine. This kind of corruption is great. Why? Well, it leads to less regulation. You mean less rules meant to protect you. Regulation isn't bad necessarily. Sure, there is an issue, could be an issue with over-regulation, and I understand that. And that is a concern, right? But right now, we have under-regulation of certain industries. The banks, for example. Look, we are still, yes, not going after banks for crashing our economy. Now, look, there are some agencies that have gone after, for example, Wells Fargo, but they end up getting laughable fines for what they've done. Things that they can basically afford to pay, fines they can afford to pay, where they can go back and continue to screw over their customers even more. Their customers being you guys. The Trump administration has not put an end to that, has not put an end to that corruption. In fact, Mick Mulvaney, now Trump's chief of staff, has actually fought to make sure that we deregulate banks and that we don't empower the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. How is that not corruption? MAGA guys, you have to understand that this administration is not meant to protect you. It was meant to enrich the elite. You guys remember railing against the elite. Well, this is the elite that is prospering at your expense. He's only been on the side of them and not you. He lied to you. He's using you for personal gain. And if you continue to support him, then you are willfully closing your eyes to this level of corruption. Okay. Now, speaking of price increases and corruption, let's go to the next story here. All right. Now, President Trump ran on lowering prescription prices back in 2016. Now, that was a position that I wholeheartedly agreed with. In fact, that is something that both Bernie Sanders and President, or back then, candidate Trump ran on. The greed of the pharmaceutical companies, they're ripping us off. That is one thing that all of us Americans can get behind. We know that we are getting ripped off by these big corporations. Now, he even promised he even followed Bernie Sanders in promising to allow Medicare to negotiate with drug manufacturers and also allow people to import cheaper prescription drugs from other countries. Now, those two things combined would have drastically lowered the price for pharmaceutical drugs, right? Now, did the Trump administration follow through on those promises? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. On Wednesday, Reuters reported that more than 250 different prescription drugs would see a price increase just this year. Now, let me go through some of those. Allergan PLC, for example, is raising the prices of over 50 different prescription drugs, with half of those prices going up by nearly 10%. That's just the first wave of price increases that will happen this year. I can guarantee that there will likely be more. AbbVie Inc., which makes the rheumatoid arthritis medication Humira, increased the price of their drug by more than 6%. That's just two examples, and we have plenty more. Already, there is a lot of drug increases that are happening this year alone. So, no decreases, just increases. So, now why is that? Well, it's because the Trump administration didn't actually do any of the thing that it said it was going to do, even though they could have easily worked with Democrats, progressive Democrats who ran on, again, empowering Medicare to be able to negotiate drug prices. Look, there are a lot of progressive Democrats now in the House. Over 40 of them won their seats. So a lot of those progressive Democrats would be in favor of this, even if it helps Donald Trump. Now, why would they not support that? Well, it's because they don't actually believe that they should do that because it would end up hurting pharmaceutical company profits. Now, the reforms that he did end up doing were incredibly pro-free market. Now, they were outlined in a New York Times article from May, and it consisted of giving private entities more tools to negotiate better deals on behalf of consumers, insurers, and employers. Oh no, we're going to give you more tools. The private entities, here's more tools so you can lower the prices. But wait, how effective is that? Well, Ronnie Gale, securities analyst at Sanford C. Bernstein and Company, said of the president's proposed fixes in the Rose Garden speech, which is when he actually announced these reforms to the system, he said, quote, "We have not seen anything which should concern investors in the pharmaceutical industry." Oh. Well, wait a minute. What happened to being a maverick and taking on the system, right? What happened to taking on the establishment and the corporations that were ripping us off? Now, it turns out he's in favor of those corporations because those corporations end up giving him and his cronies money. Now, did you know that in total, there were 96 new increases for every decrease in prescription drug prices, and 4,412 hikes in the price of prescription drugs versus just 46 cuts. And there was actually a 16-to-1 ratio of increases to decreases in drug prices in the 2 months that followed Trump's promise to cut prescription drug prices. So, turns out if you let these companies continue to raise prices without any sort of effective policy controls, well, then they're going to keep raising the prices. Shocker. Look, again, right now, Alex Azar is running the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, Azar is a former drug lobbyist. Now, do you think that that guy is going to make prescription drug prices cheaper? No, of course not. Of course he's not going to. No, he's going to do... I know this may come to a shock for some people, right? But it turns out if you get into a position where you regulate your old boss, you're going to make things more favorable for your old company so that when you get out of office, you can go back to that old company and reap the rewards. So, again, I don't know if you know this, so you're probably shocked, but that is corruption. And a lot of these politicians, thanks to the revolving door, continue to do this. That is corruption that the Trump administration promised to put an end to, but has not, and actually refuses to do. Now, another part of this is that, again, President Trump didn't understand the actual issues going on here. He doesn't understand why drug prices are so expensive. Now, it turns out that drug companies have quite a few tactics. Now, why is that important to point out these tactics? So that we can come up with smart policy in order to stop them from using these tactics to keep drug prices expensive. Now, one of the problems is pay for delay. Now, what happens is that drug companies will sue generic drug makers to prevent them from selling cheaper versions. Now, they will then settle those cases by paying the generics to delay introducing cheaper versions. So basically, what happened? There's supposed to be free market here, right? And Republicans always talk about free market. We're going to have free market solutions. We're going to let competition happen. Well, it turns out that these large drug makers effectively kill their own competition by doing this pay for delay stuff. Oh, you come out with a cheaper drug, I'll sue you, and then we'll settle, and we'll just pay you to delay your cheaper generic so that we continue to reap the benefits of charging full price for this drug. Okay, then. Sure. Now, everywhere else, that is illegal. But in America, it's perfectly fine. And the administration, of course, has not actually done anything about this. Now, of course, to be fair, it's not just the Trump administration. This has been a problem under the Obama administration. This has been a problem for years under many different administrations, both Republicans and Democrats, because it turns out that all these administrations end up being lobbied by these same companies. So here you have the pharmaceutical industry that pays, that actually lobbies Congress more than anybody. Now, again, that is hugely problematic, and that is why we're in the situation that we're in. If we continue to have lobbying, and if we continue to have money in politics, then we are not actually going to solve this issue. Now, again, the Trump administration said something about getting money out of politics, but it was fairly clear that he wasn't serious about it. And neither was, of course, anyone else that was running, save for Bernie Sanders. So, anyway. Now, there's another tactic here. And by the way, pay for delay costs Americans an estimated $3.5 billion per year. Just pointing that out. That's money that comes out of your pocket that you end up paying extra in prescription drugs. Now, there's another tactic here. Even after patents have expired, some U.S. drug companies will also continue to aggressively advertise their brands so patients will ask doctors for them instead of generic versions. And most doctors end up complying. Now, look, most people who need medication don't have time to shop around, and they see these advertisements for, let's use Humira as an example. Oh, well, we'll just get that. And maybe that's a poor example because that's sort of a rare drug from what I understand, but it's, I guess, at least kind of shows you that brand name is really important, right? And so what we have here is these companies that use their large advertising budgets to make sure that people know only the name of their drug and the fact that there is no actual, well, there is, but they don't want people to know that there's actually a generic version that will end up being cheaper. So there's that. Now, other nations, by the way, don't actually allow direct advertising of prescription drugs to happen. So they can't actually advertise. But in America, well, we do. We allow that. Now, the president has not addressed that because likely, again, he does not know that this is an actual problem. So, unfortunately, there was a lot of talk during this, during the campaign and during his administration to lower prescription drug prices. Unfortunately, it has not happened. And so I don't believe that he was ever going to do this. I think it was a throwaway line. But hey, look, I'm willing to be surprised. I hope maybe he does do some actual reforms, but I very, very much doubt it. I think you guys have been, MAGA guys, I think you guys have been used. And maybe it's time you admit that he does not care about you, that he used your anger against the system and against these corporations in order to enrich himself and said corporations. Because I believe, from what I've seen, that's the kind of person Donald Trump is. Okay. I'm going to take a break here. We'll come back. We got stories about the Green New Deal and Ocasio-Cortez and tax cuts. So, or tax increases. So that's a great story. Stay right here, share out the stream. We'll come back with those stories. Please like and share, and we'll be back around the nation. Everybody, welcome back to the show. Around the nation, right here. Jeff Waldorf with you. No super chats, nor do I have any sort of no donations yet on the camera fund. So you want to do that? You want to help out? GoFundMe.com/TYT Camera. There'll be a link in the description if you want to donate. Okay. we have some good news before we get back into the stories. Centoya Brown, you guys might have remembered that story. She is a former sex trafficking victim that was put in prison, of course. She had served 15 years and now has actually been granted clemency. So Governor Bill Haslam has announced that she will be released to parole on August 7th after serving 15 years in prison for killing basically the guy who was going to rape her, the guy that was going to, that had actually bought her for sex. So again, she was a minor at that time. Still, she was being trafficked. She killed him in self-defense and ended up going to prison, serving 15 years, and now she will be on parole. Now, the original story said that she wasn't going to be paroled for 51 years. But thankfully, there's a lot of pressure from celebrities, even including Kim Kardashian West, who talked to the Trump administration about raising awareness and things like that. So a lot of credit goes to a lot of different people, and especially to Governor Haslam for giving her clemency, allowing her to go on parole. I feel like there's some justice today. So that's really good, and I'm really happy about this news. So, all right. It's good news. It's good news. All right. So, let's go into the stories here. All right. Now, because of rising stars like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Green New Deal, or the idea of a Green New Deal, has actually become incredibly popular among voters, especially Democratic voters who are deeply concerned about climate change, but also even among Republicans who care about both jobs and climate change. Now, nonetheless, there's some conventional wisdom in Washington about this idea. That conventional wisdom is basically, oh, no, this is too radical. Oh, actually, getting rid of fossil fuels and transferring over to a 100% renewable energy system within 12 years, it's too radical. Change is too fast, it's too expensive, and more so, the public will never go along with it. Well, there is a new poll out that those politicians who still follow the conventional wisdom, especially among Democratic voters, maybe they should take a look at this, right? Now, new polling from Data for Progress shows that incumbent congressional candidates in 2020 could be ousted by progressive primary challengers if they fail to back a Green New Deal. Now, one example of a politician facing trouble in 2020 is Democratic Representative Kathleen Rice. Now, she's a New York Democrat, and she actually has a pretty good approval rating in her district. Now, during the whole Speaker of the House fight, she did unsuccessfully fight to replace Pelosi. Now, the thing about her is that, well, she wanted to replace Nancy Pelosi with someone even more conservative. Now, again, there was a fight from both the left and the right to try to replace Pelosi as Speaker of the House. She was on the side, Rice was on the side of an even more conservative Speaker of the House. Which, if you pay attention to Pelosi, you would think, wait a minute, more conservative, you might as well just put a Republican up there. Because Nancy Pelosi is actually pretty close to a Republican herself. I mean, over the weekend, she pulled an All Lives Matter when asked if she supported Black Lives Matter. All right, come on. No, you're talking about All Lives Matter. All Lives Matter. No, that should be a really easy thing to say. When somebody asks you, do Black Lives Matter? You should say, yes, they do. And leave it at that. Because saying Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that you're not saying that everyone else's lives matter. We're not talking about everybody else's lives. We're talking about Black lives specifically. And saying that those lives matter doesn't mean that you're not saying everyone else's lives don't matter. So that's again, the correct response on that would have been Black Lives Matter. Yes. But anyway, Pelosi, this woman wanted to replace Pelosi with somebody even more conservative than that. Fantastic, right? Now, the thing is, right, you could tell from her vote for Pelosi, and why that matters is that she's incredibly conservative and so has not backed calls for a Green New Deal, right? Now, in Rice's Long Island district, 300 likely Democratic primary voters were told that Rice does not currently support a Green New Deal, and asked about how a candidate's position on a plan to invest trillions of dollars in the development and distribution of green energy, creating millions of new high-wage jobs while preventing catastrophic climate change, would impact their decisions in the ballot box next primary. So again, this is somebody who is fairly popular in her area, right? And not some radical leftist, right? That the establishment is fairly establishment, right? So would they support her or somebody who supports a Green New Deal? Well, here are the results. When asked if they would support the Green New Deal candidate, 47% of them said absolutely in a primary. Now, only 18% would support an anti-Green New Deal candidate, 22% said no impact, and 13% were not sure. So this could possibly get even higher. Awesome. So, major support for a Green New Deal, right? And again, this is while Rice has a pretty good approval rating among her constituents. So now, in case you're thinking, of course, that this is that this kind of bold progressive action is only supported by white Bernie bros, well then, think again. It turns out, according to Evan Roth-Smith of Slingshot Strategies, who conducted this poll for Data for Progress, he said that, quote, the strongest margin of support for the Green New Deal is actually older suburban women. He said, quote, that is the constituency for a Green New Deal in Rice's district. People that you would consider to be more conservative look at the Green New Deal and say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Let's try that. Now, she's not the only one. Massachusetts 6th District, right? Now, that district is currently represented by Representative Seth Moulton. Now, it shows that Democrats who have backed the Green New Deal, but are more centrist and opposed to Pelosi's bid for Speaker, even if they ultimately voted for her, could also face progressive challengers in 2020. Again, a more conservative district, and even so, the people there still say, yes, Green New Deal. Now, Moulton has a 61% favorable rating among these 300 likely Democratic primary voters, according to the Daily Beast. But, quote, when pitted against other prospective Democratic challengers, only 49% said that they would back him. Of those surveyed, 29% said that they were not sure. As Smith put it, Seth Moulton is in real political trouble over his hesitancy to vote for Pelosi. Moulton will be forced to defend his political decision-making and is clearly vulnerable to potential primary challengers who are already registering double-digit support. And though he has endorsed the Green New Deal, which is smart, Moulton faces a real risk from his opposition to Medicare for All, according to Sean McElway, who is Data for Progress founder. He said the base is ready. When a primary challenger emerges, I'd bet on them. So now you also have a Medicare for All, program that is now part of this survey, as well as a Green New Deal. So you can't just be for one and not the other. Now these Democrats are now being considered, or they're now being faced with having to support both. as a litmus test in this primary. So now, I think that's a great thing. I think we do need to have some sort of litmus tests, and I think these two things are really a great example. Again, we have only 12 years to stave off catastrophic climate change by going completely carbon neutral and actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere. That report issued by the Trump administration itself is absolutely damning. And if we want to do something about it, we have to take bold progressive action in putting forward renewable energy sources that will be able to power our society. So now what's great about this too is that this is how much the Democrats have actually shifted left since 2016. And guess what? It's because of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other progressives that are actually running on bold progressive policy. This is a monumental shift in the conversation that we are now having in America, especially inside the Democratic Party. Now, I'm guessing that if there are candidates that fail to back these policies or openly advocate for them, then it's getting more likely that they will not survive a Democratic primary. Now, Elizabeth Warren, she's a great example of this, right? Elizabeth Warren is running for president. She has been talking about healthcare. Guess what she hasn't mentioned? Medicare for all. Now, that's interesting because she is a co-sponsor for Medicare for all, but when she's out there talking about healthcare, she's not actually openly advocating for a Medicare for all system. That's going to be problematic, as are obviously this primary is going to have a lot of progressives that are staking out a progressive position. If you're not doing that, then you are going to fail to stand out, and you will likely fail this primary process. So, look, we can't have centrist, moderate candidates in 2020 anymore, especially since in 2016, we had a centrist, moderate candidate, and they ended up losing to President Donald Trump. So everybody in the Democratic primary, Democratic voters now have a desire to vote for people with a bold progressive position. So now is the time to put forward those candidates and to support those candidates, because the will of the voters seems to be quite clear on these issues, and they want progressive policy. Okay. One more story here. Now, one of the questions that always seems to get asked for when it comes to paying for things like Medicare for all or a Green New Deal is, how are we going to pay for it? Well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, look, to be fair, there are a lot of studies out there that show that Medicare for all actually costs less. So actually, if you were to implement a Medicare for all system, you'd be saving money. But okay, the Green New Deal, it's definitely going to cost money, right? And free college, you're going to see some investment here, right? Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this weekend decided to answer that question when she was asked, and conservative heads have imploded because of it. Now, when she was on 60 Minutes, she pointed out, when asked by Anderson Cooper, how are we going to pay for these situations, right? How are we going to pay for these policies that you're putting forward? Well, for one, we actually had really high tax rates back in the 1960s and 70s that she was pointing that out. But the other thing I was going to mention is that she said, well, how are we going to pay for Space Force? How are we going to pay for military spending? Well, you know what? We'll pay for these policies the same way we pay for those things. So why is it that we only have this conversation when it comes to healthcare or education. And that's what she said. Now, here's the thing, right? What she and the reason that she brings up these tax brackets is that it turns out that if you tax rich people, you end up actually having more resources to be able to pay for other things. Weird, I know, right? Now, taxing the rich is actually an incredibly popular proposal among regular people. Now, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll conducted last year, they found that 53% of adults strongly agree that the wealthiest Americans should pay higher tax rates. An additional 23% somewhat agree that the wealthiest should pay higher taxes. So overall, over 3/4 of Americans say, let's tax the rich. They need to have higher tax rates. Now, those higher tax rates in the past were up to 70, sometimes 90%. Now, of course, rich people don't agree with that. At least a lot of them. There are some that actually do agree with that. One of them happens to be Nick Hanauer. And there's also a group called Patriotic Millionaires that say, oh, no, actually, maybe you should tax me more. Not maybe, you should absolutely tax me more. Because this is money that we don't actually need, right? But there are many in conservative circles that basically don't agree, and they pay people to say things like this. Now, I'm going to read you a tweet here from Steve Scalise, whose head basically exploded after AOC had mentioned that we're going to raise your tax rates, or we want to raise your tax rates. He said, Republicans, let Americans keep more of their hard income money. Democrats, take away 70% of your income and give it to a leftist fantasy programs. I have to mention that Medicare for All is not a fantasy program. Single-payer healthcare is basically a part of every OECD country. So we're one of the only modern industrialized countries that doesn't actually have a single-payer universal healthcare system. So we're the odd man out. And the only one that is so barbaric that we allow people to continue to go broke over healthcare. But anyway, now, you also have Stuart Varney. Now, Stuart Varney is also a rich person. He works for Fox News, and he went on Fox and Friends and said this.
Taxed at 90%. Why bother?
Did the gentleman refer to a fair share?
Yes.
A fair share is 90% for the government and maybe 10% kept by you? That hardly seems fair to me. Looks to 2 points. Looks to me like, number one, the far left is now calling the shots for the entire Democrat Party as you roll up towards 2020.
At least so two of the bigger names.
Okay.
Well, what's the sense of working
But they're
hard,
they're making all of the headlines. They're making all of the running. And Nancy Pelosi constantly has to talk about whether she's going to go with this or with that. The far left is making the running. And that's very dangerous for America.
It's very dangerous that not only we have people who are left-wing that are starting to have inroads in the Democratic Party, and I don't agree with them. I don't think that progressive voices have drowned out and have taken power in the party, although they have certainly made a lot of inroads, as I said before. But it's so dangerous for America. Well, no, it's so dangerous to go back to tax rates that we had historically had in the past during a time of great prosperity. Oh, I know who it's dangerous for. It's dangerous for you because you don't want to pay any extra. Now, here's the thing about that. Again, there's no context here because we're talking about marginal tax rates. See, here's the thing, the framing here. And by the way, I love the whole fact that the panel, nobody on that panel makes less than $1 million a year. So here you have millionaires saying, oh, a tax on millionaires is such a horrible thing. Well, you're going to be personally affected. I think you have a little bit of a bias. But again, the framing, 90% of it is being kept by the government and only 10% being kept by you. Well, look, for one, that's only anything over $10 million a year. And they weren't even talking about 70%. AOC was talking about, or I'm sorry, wasn't about 90%. AOC was talking about 70. Julian Castro brought up the fact that historically we even had a 90% rate, but generally he was more in favor of AOC's 70%. So again, they take this out of context and they say, well, Democrats, all the Democrats believe in 90% taxes on all of you. But that's not true. Unless they're talking to a room full of millionaires, that's not true at all. And of course, it would have to be people making over $10 million a year, because that's how marginal taxes work, right? Again, so look, again, Republicans want you to think that they're going to be taxing regular people, regular working people at 70%. That's insanity. That's not true at all. This is a marginal tax rate, right? Which means the cap is $10 million, right? So you make $10 million. Anything over that is taxed at 70%. That's how marginal tax rates work, right? Now, how many people would be affected by that tax? 1 million, 2 million, 40 million? No, 16,000. 16,000 Americans earn $10 million or more a year. This would affect 16,000 people total. Now, the money raised from that would actually benefit millions of people. I don't know. I think that sounds pretty fair. Just saying. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, she fired back at Steve Scalise, and she said, "You're the GOP minority whip. How do you not know how marginal tax rates work?" Well, that's the thing. They do understand how it works, but their whole purpose is to mislead you. Now, she adds, "Almost forgot, GOP works for the corporate CEO showering themselves in multi-million-dollar bonuses, not the actual working people whose wages plus healthcare they're ripping off for profit." And that is why I love AOC. The clackbacks are real, and they're actually based in facts. People who are against raising taxes on the very wealthy are either very wealthy themselves or have been misled. They have fallen for the conservative fear-mongering on taxes and don't understand marginal rates. The idea that the government will tax everyone at 70%, again, you know what ironically that would be? If the government taxed everybody at 70%, that would literally be a flat tax. Wait, who's the party that's actually out there advocating for a flat tax? I think it was a Republican Party. I think it was Paul Ryan talking about how we need a flat tax. Now, of course, their flat tax would be 10% or 15%, right? Well, that would mean millionaires and billionaires would be paying a tax rate of 15%. Now, obviously, that is a regressive tax, because if you're poor and you're paying 15%, you're paying a larger share of your income than rich people are, right? And again, while rich people will be paying more money, the share of their income going to the federal government will obviously be far less than somebody who makes $30,000 a year. So that's important context. That's why the flat tax is a scam. Now, what you have here, of course, are Republicans falsely claiming that AOC and the Democrats want a high flat tax on everybody, where in reality, we are actually for a progressive tax, meaning the more you make, the more you will get charged. And of course, marginal rates, if you make more than $10 million a year, anything over 10 million will end up being taxed at a higher rate than anything under 10 million. So, but the thing is that this is not given context on purpose. Now, the truth be told, the years that conservatives say they want to go back to, the 1950s and 60s and 40s, the greatest generation, right? Those times, they heavily taxed the rich. That's when tax rates were in the 70s to 90%. Now, at the times where we had severe economic problems, the 20s and 30s, the time right before the Great Depression, That's when tax rates were historically low. And then, of course, after Reagan, and then before the Great Recession, tax rates have also been historically low on the wealthy. So we have lots of recessions and depressions whenever taxes on the rich are super low, but have periods of enormous economic growth and prosperity when tax rates on the wealthy are really high. I'm sure there's a pattern in there somewhere. I'm sure that you can glean some information from that that would be very useful in determining effective tax policy. That's if you actually cared about tax policy. But hey, on that vein, if you want to go back to the good old days, well then you should be in favor of soaking the rich. Whereas most of, 75%, over 75% of Americans are in favor of that. It's just unfortunate that our representation is the rich and they don't represent us. And so they will end up benefiting themselves with lower tax rates. So that's the reality here. I love AOC fighting back against this and actually trying to, teach people the reality instead of going along with the corporate Democrats who say, oh no, we should only slightly higher taxes on the rich, or at least keep them the same because we're rich too. So anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for going around the nation with me. Thank you for watching. No super chats, unfortunately. But if you want to, we could use your help in the fundraiser. Trying to raise $1,500 for a new camera. So go to GoFundMe.com/TYTNation camera to help out with that. We've raised about $295. We are trying to get 1,500. We're also trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. We are like 1,100 subs away from hitting 100,000. So please share, help out, subscribe if you haven't already, and share and care. All right, guys. Thank you. We'll see you guys tomorrow right here around the nation. Love you guys, and remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. See you tomorrow.